many people assume a finished painting is the artist arriving somewhere. What if Violet Rapids is the opposite of arrival? And why would that matter to someone who isn't a painter?
Sure. So I'd like to talk about how I make these paintings altogether. What I do is I make largely in plein air, so in person, actually painting in front of the subject and visiting and returning to the subject many times. What I do is I create dozens of versions of the same place on temporary supports, temporary plexiglass panels. And then from there, I find individual areas from these studies and I sculpt them together into forms and use these kind of tiny moments, these tiny bits and pieces of paintings to be able to build the full fledged. And the goal with that is partially to challenge myself in terms of creating a new type of painting that I feel is more akin to what it's like to make decisions today, and the decision making that it seems to be more accurate. I feel like with the advent of many of the technologies that we use on a day-to-day basis, as well as with artificial intelligence and beyond, what's occurring is a sense of confidence in one's ability to articulate what they want and what their desires are. And with these tools and with the advent of prompting and with them becoming more advanced with agentic AI and beyond, what that's creating for is a new kind of existence where almost the individual person becomes an omnipotent being, in that they think and therefore they can get. And I think the strength or the excitement that I feel for that lies within one's own, the skill that's involved with the ability to articulate exactly what you want and to be able to therefore get exactly what you want. And the development of that precision within language, that precision within desire and precision within thought, I feel like doesn't really have a place within the way that, within the discipline of plein air painting altogether. And if I'm outside, if I'm painting and I'm working on a work, and I keep building up layers and layers and layers of my painting until I feel like it's done, I don't feel like that there's any metaphor whatsoever to what it's like to exist. I almost feel like that act is irrelevant to the way that these decisions are being made. If I'm rendering a form, or if I'm seeing an image, or if I'm seeing a face, and I'm slowly adding colors and moving brushes and pushing things around until it looks like the thing that I want, that has very little to do with what it's like to exist today. And so I wanted to develop a type of painting that allowed or afforded me an opportunity to be able to do that. And that's what I feel like I've done. And so by making dozens of versions of the same place and having those kinds of thoughts, but allowing myself to be completely free to be able to jump on whatever whims that I want to be able to have, and then from those whims, being completely empty and exhausted of my own creativity, then identifying areas within those studies that I want, I can see them as an opportunity itself, see that golden nugget, preserve the integrity of the surface, and turn it into a form, and then build my paintings from those. What was your question?
We'll come back to the question. I think that we can explore two different avenues here, and maybe what I would like to see is to explore the process a little bit more, like the actual physical, the physicality of the process in itself first. So walk me through like the floor. There's a moment with the studies laid out where you haven't committed to anything just yet. Describe what Violet Rapids looked like in that not knowing before it was a painting.
Sure. So I would say with many of the studies that I've created for Violet Rapids, prior to even doing the kind of like painterly studies, I originally started with seeing this and finding and painting not only the stones that were around it, but also the fauna and the landscape in the actual land and in the actual location of this work. It's caught in this wedge between a highway on a road. And it's a very fast-moving highway. And honestly, I wouldn't even found it if not for a bug that flew through my window and landed. It was like this crazy looking, like green, like orangish bug that landed on the car seat of my door. And so I was swerving, trying to get it out of my Jeep. And then I just pulled in and found a rest stop and pulled in. And it turned out to be like this park. And I thought it was really fascinating at seeing this at first, because I saw this incredibly fast moving highway that I was on, but then it was also wedged between a railroad tracks. And so I was thinking about, initially when I was creating this work, that this was going to be a painting about the wedges of where we put nature, or where we put these beautiful places. Because it is a truly incredible, and the way that the water moves through the rocks, but then also has like these existing structures. It's almost as if society and civilization had built itself and boxed it around this thing, but still preserved it. Like we couldn't enter this. This is protected, but everything else could go around it. But no one lives here because it's too loud. There's too much chaos and everything else. But this lives here, this place. And so initially, when I was looking at this, and I think a lot of my paintings tend to go with this, is that I tend to start thinking about land, but eventually the memory of the place ends up walking backwards from itself, away from the actual place itself and from the actual land, and more about the phenomenon of being and seeing and whatever, internal emotional state that could be occurring, or even what it could evoke on people who experience and go to these places. And so the initial studies included a lot more information, I would say. And through the process of creating, I was stripping everything back away from what was truly essential to what I felt like was the inherent message that I felt would resonate most deeply with me, but also the things that I care about the most.
Sometimes the most important marks in the painting, and I would posit in this painting as well, are the ones that you refuse to make. What did you refuse, and what were you tempted to do instead?
When I am laying out my panels on my studio floor and arranging things and kind of reorganizing and trying to identify the best possible areas that I want to steal to be able to sculpt into a form, there's a lot of different decisions that can take place in that, with not only allowing them to dry for an extended period of time, which would create a kind of a thickness or a texture, or kind of like almost like a plastic bag type feel, but also, and if not left to dry, and if sculpted very, very quickly or within less than a day after making them, the forms tend to be like very wet and very fluid and a little bit more moldable. And those create different feelings. Those create different, I would say that different actors or different characters in the play of the painting that I create. And especially because they exist more as forms and objects and sculptural pieces, that there can be a dimensionality. And that dimensionality can cast shadows, and that those shadows can create new color relationships that maybe I didn't plan necessarily, but I just have to work with, and I have to work around. When I am looking at this individual work, there was an instinct at first to be able to create very large and bold and exciting forms. And having this work, almost thinking about how few forms could I use to be able to cover such a large panel. But then I started doing more tweaking and more drawings and testing, and thinking about it more as like using smaller forms. And when I was looking at the smaller forms, it kind of created a type of like almost hypnotism and chaos and intensity that it felt like I could add more information. And that, I never want, I don't think painting is particularly entertaining. Like in the act of like looking or going and seeking and finding painting and the desire to be around painting in the way that I am now, where I just get to kind of sit and look. I'm not doing it because it's like fun. I would say what I'm doing it for is in the same way that one might find a sunrise or a sunset awe-inspiring. It's kind of and it's a beautiful opportunity to be able to create that sensation and create those things and being around that. And when I go to a museum, I'm looking for that sensation. I'm looking for that kind of like that like a kind of fullness in a way, a spiritual filling. I look at this type of work and I think about when I get close to a painting like this, when I'm really like literally close to it, that hypnotism is only enhanced. And it gets even deeper and it gets even more profound to me, in that if this was a painting about kind of spacing out and losing and recollecting myself in a way, or rebuilding myself, then, and the times that I'm most aware that that's occurring is when I'm spacing out, then my proximity to that thing only gets enhanced or gets more information the farther away I am from it, but then also the closer that I am from it. And I like that. I like the way that I say that. And like, there's a lot of intentionality that goes to the way that that has been said, because it feels right. It feels like if someone was telling a story about my painting, they would also be telling a story about themselves. What? Was it done?
No, not at all. So, what does Violet Rapids do that only this painting, made in this way, can do? If those 3 inches of built paint could be faked in any other method and still look identical, the process is a story you tell, not a property of the work. Which is it?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, I like to think that the paintings, the most powerful and profound use for painting is for storytelling. Mm-hmm. And I think that at some point, in my time, creating these works, not only these works, but creating works in general, I had to come to a kind of realization about what I believed that painting was to me, and what art was to me, and what the most profound aspects of being an artist are, but also the most profound aspects of making these things and the life that these things tend to have. And it's not just the things that I create, but also the things that anybody creates. I just had to find that answer for myself. And I came to a consensus that I really believed that the most profound use for painting specifically was within storytelling, and its capacity and capability to be able to help people create narrative and to be able to help people articulate thoughts. And I believed that if narrative could be spun and if thoughts could be shared, and if this helped people do that, then it could change people's minds as well. And so when I think about any type of visual aid whatsoever, and we even use it in our own English vernacular, in that if I wanted to tell you something with utmost precision, I would tell you that let me try to paint you a picture of how this is, and let me help you paint this for me. And I think that is kind of, it sticks with me and is profound to me, because when I make these works, I want to be very sensitive to how I tell the narrative of how I make them, but also how someone could also tell their own story and tell their own narrative, and what narratives could they spin, and could they derive from the works that they do. And I think it's different for everyone, of course, but when I think about how one would describe how these works are made, that there's this, this artist, and he takes everything he knows about the world, he puts it on the ground, and he rebuilds into himself, and that's how he makes these paintings. He makes dozens of versions and lays them on the ground in his studio, and then rebuilds them back together, and you can still see the surface integrity of each little painting on that. And he did that because he was feeling a certain level of overwhelm, and I felt that way too. And imagine that as the beginning of a story, right? And the type of person who would want to tell that story. And imagine how much deeper whatever thing that they wanted to share or point that they wanted to make would be that much more memorable if it started from that position, right? And I think that as an artist, as someone who makes things, it's my job to to create objects that have a certain level of, have a provocative kind of nature, not only in the subject, the content, or the material. And it would ask the owner, or ask the business owner, or ask whoever owns it, what is this? What is this made of? What is this? Why is this here? I would say that question is an opportunity to be able to get into that type of conversation and tell that story.
And so with this mosaic method, right? Speaking of the method itself, it sits between things. It's not quite plein air, such as Lois Dodd's paintings. It's not memory distance like Eleanor Ray, nor is it photo reference like Walker. So is the assembly transforming the observation?
I think it's getting to a different side of the 20-sided die of the phenomenological problem of what it is to experience awe. And where I'm coming from it is kind of from a utilitarian perspective, and I'm using a lot of big words just because they kind of feel right now. But I would say that there's a utility involved in decision making, and there's a utility, and it's almost feeling like the tools that are at my disposal are inadequate to be able to describe what it's like to live today. And I feel like I just need it, and I feel like based on that premise and then on that common denominator, I think it changes or gives a different perspective on how one could filter the information, the things that they're perceiving. And like I said before, I'm not really painting land. There's no real landmark necessarily that's involved with any of my locations. Yeah, there's a landscape part of it too, and there's definitely a representational component where these forms and these things that I create, they are recognizable. And even inside each of the individual mosaic pieces that you see, you can find small scenes and pictures and other things that I've drawn and built from it as well. And I think I use those more as metaphorical tools for someone to be able to create a story.
Okay. Within this story of it seems what you're saying is that there's a feeling that people carry with them that they can't quite name, something that they might have been through or something that is still inside. that might be better felt rather than spoken. And so if this premise is true, what is the feeling Violet Rapid holds that someone might recognize before they have words for it?
Yeah, I really like the idea of feeling too overwhelmed to be present. But I think there always tends to be a kind of like negative connotation to that, like a problem that needs to be solved. And I think that when I hear discourse, or when I hear even friends or family or people talking about a common feeling, which is I just feel so overwhelmed. I feel like everything is going so fast and so intense, and I just can't seem to sit still or feel patient. I've noticed that in moments where there is an opportunity to find that sense of stillness and that sense of peace, that it takes a lot more work than you think to be able to slow down. And I'd like to describe it not in a recipe necessarily, but I'd like to describe it in a way that shares the dynamism of the moment. Like that moment, yeah, like it's uncomfortable. It's totally painful, and I've experienced it, and it's really distressing, and it makes you want to take a couple Advil. Like I totally get it. But I also think that there's something to be said for this kind of like energy that is within you when you're seeing and when you're experiencing these places. And the reason that, and I go back to that thing about the builder before, because I've just found that people who tend to do those things and seek out those challenges, they tend to experience the things that I'm trying to talk about more often than people who don't seek out those things. And so I would say that there's, and I think it's like it's recalling back to this idea of like if you've gone and if you've challenged yourself and you've maybe succeeded or maybe failed 100 times and are still on the 101st failure, there's still a kind of like love and satisfaction for those in between moments, in between the trying and following the journey of trying to find that success, that you recall as being like the worst time ever, like crappy and terrible, but also still filled with like joy and excitement and love for the thing. Because you wouldn't have been on that journey. You wouldn't have kept going if you didn't. And so I think that if I recall those moments in my own life, or ask people who I admire and or are my heroes to recall moments in their life, they tend to look on those moments of even the suck as like with such fondness, And I wonder about how aware I am of the individual moments when I am zoning out, where I am terrible, that moment itself could also be dynamic, and it also exists in this place.
So, I mean, in the same vein, like when you were creating this painting,
sure,
what did you have to give up to finish it? Like, what belief or self-image about your own work didn't survive the process and of making this painting?
Yeah. So I think it's funny because like wasn't really prepared to actually talk about or answer this question. But in June or in July of 2025, there was a flood upstairs in my building. And there was a pipe that exploded, and it flooded this entire wall that's behind this work, and several of my works got severely damaged and destroyed, and it destroyed a significant chunk of my storage area. And I think that there's a time where I just really wanted to give up, and I just wanted to stop. And I really wanted to just let it bury me in a way. And I think that there's a lot of romanticism that comes about being in this studio and in this place. And I've I've felt like I've worked very hard to be able to create a space for myself where I can really make the things that I felt like I wanted to make and get to, and at least try, or at least pursue a kind of originality within, or not even originality, like an authenticity in my own, in my own speaking, like getting painting one step closer to my own edness, if you will. And so there were long nights where like I'd sit on these couches and I would look up at these ceilings that are painted green and look in between the cracks. Inside all of those cracks and inside all of those things is like dust from this 300 or 400-year-old shoe mill building. And all I could think about, like at 2 a.m. at night, cleaning up after this flood, was all of those long nights where all of that dust and all of that stuff was all over my paintings. And it was drawing and disgusting and terrible. And I think I just finished this painting, like, and the flood wasn't that long ago, to be fair. But I think the thing that forced me to get through was this idea that, hey, I needed this moment, these moments of like of solace and zoning out and intensity, to be the things that I looked back at fondly. And I knew that somebody needed this painting, because I needed to know that this thing existed. If that makes sense.
I think this is my last question.
Okay.
If a stranger watched this conversation in whole and went back to their life completely unchanged, what's the one thing you want to be different in the way that they see anything afterwards?
I would say that even if I put it into like one sentence, it's not so simple to sit still. And even though we want, in moments of overwhelm, when the greatest desire is to find a sense of stillness or peace or calm, we need to get into not only physical spaces, but occupy spaces. But then recognize that it's going to take a little bit more work than just being there. And that's just the world we live in. Yeah. Do I get the Tetragrammaton song to play me out?
That would be pretty funny.
Is that how that works?